Hi guys, if you've been following me on WhatsApp or on Snap, you would know I'm crazy about chapter 4. I pre-read chapter 4 and it's really interesting. I decided to start pre-reading it so I can see some of the words and not and probably make fewer mistakes. But let's get started. Chapter 4. What is a heist? The dark ages still reign over all humanity, and the depth and persistence of distant domination are only now becoming clear. This Dark Ages prison has no steel bars, chains, or locks. Instead, it is locked by misorientation and built of misinformation. Our Buckminster Fuller. When I read this quote in this book, Cosmography, another posthumous book that followed grunge, the idea that we were in the dark ages rattled my brain. I wanted to learn more. My question, my question was, how does grunge keep us in the dark ages? For me, reading Grunge of Giants was like putting together the first 100 pieces out of a 1,000 piece jigsaw puzzle. The 100 pieces from Fuller's Grunge of Giants interlocked with the other 100 puzzle pieces my rich dad had linked together for me years before. The puzzle was beginning to take shape and make sense. I began to understand how our wealth was being stolen via a heist of our money. In 1983, I believed that I had about 200 pieces of a 1,000 piece jigsaw puzzle. I could see a picture forming, and I wanted to learn more. For the first time in my life, I was truly a student. I wanted to learn more, and I knew I could not learn what I needed to learn by staying still. So I decided to do what Fuller had done in 1927. I took a leap of faith onto the unknown. Why the unknown? Because I really didn't know what the future would hold. My only thoughts were, if Bucky Fuller found his genius leaping into the unknown in 1927, maybe I should and could too. I wasn't too bright in school, so I thought that maybe I'll be smarter in the unknown. What was driving you? Why did you give up a good life for something that was unknown? Injustice. I grew up in the 60s, an extremely turbulent time. There were protests against the war in Vietnam and race riots at home. In 1965, I left my sleepy hometown of Hilo, Hawaii, and went to school in New York at the Merchant Marine Academy. My roommate was a young black man, and who today, to be politically correct, I should refer to as African American. Tom Jackson was my first African American friend because in Hilo, there were no African Americans. With race riots in the news every night, Jackson would fill in the blanks, giving me the other side of the story. We all know there's racial discrimination. There was discrimination in Hawaii. The whites called Helu- Heoles versus Asians and Hawaiians, but it was not near the level of discrimination my friend Tom experienced. So it's racial discrimination that drives you? Yes and no. There will always be discrimination. It is injustice that drives me. After graduating from Kings Point, the Merchant Marine Academy in 1969, I went to flight school in Florida, not far from Alabama, A white classmate from flight school invited me to his home in Birmingham, the city at the epicenter of the 1960s race riots. And what did you learn? That racial discrimination is financial discrimination. The blacks were fighting for the opportunity for a better life. In talking with other people in Alabama, both white and black, it became clear to me that they were struggling for the same thing, a better life. You may recall that the protests and riots at the time was over integration of their schools. Both blacks and whites wanted better education for a better life. So, what is the injustice? The injustice is the lack of financial education in our schools. People go to school for a better life, yet few learn anything about money. And today, the same problem exists. People still go to school but learn very little about money. Is that the injustice? Yes. Today, people of all races and all socioeconomic classes, rich, middle class, and poor, are struggling for money. This caused people to panic over whether or not their child is getting the best education possible so they can get a good, high paying job. Ironically, their child will learn little, if anything, about money. So I'm not seeing what the injustice is. The injustice is financial ignorance. Today, almost everyone in every part of the world is having their wealth stolen via the financial system, via their money, and most do not even realize it. Their wealth is being stolen via their work, savings, and investment in the stock market. If things do not change, I am afraid the rioting of the 60s will return, and this time, it will not be the race riots. When I was 18, Tom Jackson, my roommate at Kings Point, took me home with him to Washington, D.C. That trip disturbed me to the core, and visiting my white friend's home in Birmingham, Alabama, right after race riots in that city also disturbed me deeply. Today, I see the same creep of panic and poverty bleeding into all corners of society. I know why drugs and crimes are professions of choice in inner cities. Crime pays more than a job, and drugs relieve the pain people are in. At least drugs and crime can put food on the table and a roof over your head. Today, that pain has spread across all levels within our society. Money and ignorance do not discriminate. The lack of financial education is injustice. And reading Grunch of Giants just made me want to learn more. As Fuller said, you can never learn less. You can only learn more. So that is why Kim and I took our leap of faith in 1984. We really did not know what to do. All we knew was that we had to do something. The power of the paycheck. Rich Dad said, the paycheck is one of the most powerful tools ever created by man. The person who signs the paycheck has the power to enslave another person's body, mind, and soul. He also said, when slavery was abolished, the rich created paychecks. This is why chapter 1 in Rich Dad Poor Dad is titled, The Rich Don't Work for Money. So, how do we end this injustice? It starts with words. Words are tools. Fuller often said, words are tools. Since words affect our minds, He believed words are some of the most powerful tools invented by humans, which is why he chose his words carefully. Bucky believed many people struggled with life simply because they used words that disempowered them, made them weak, confused, fearful, sometimes even angry. One rich dad wouldn't allow his son Mike and me to say, I can't afford it. He was echoing Bucky's belief that words can steal your power and make you weak. Instead, we were to ask ourselves, how can I afford it? And challenge our brains to expand our means. The words we choose and use either upon our minds or close them make us feel powerful and creative or powerless victims of life. That's the power of words. My rich dad also agreed with Fuller when it came to financial words. For example, Rich Dad believed many people were poor simply because they used poor words. If you read Rich Dad Poor Dad, you may recall my poor dad often said, my house is an asset. And my rich dad would say, your father may be a highly educated man, but his house is not an asset. It's a liability. Millions of people are poor or struggle financially simply because they use poor or incorrect words. Millions of people struggle financially because they refer to their liabilities as assets. Assets. Rich Dad's definitions were simple. They were assets put money in your pocket. Liabilities take money from your pocket. He would then draw a simple diagram of a financial statement. To illustrate his definitions, he used diagrams because a picture is worth 1,000 words. As you can see from the diagram, the word that determines an asset or liability is cash flow. It's possible that these two words, cash flow, are the most important words in financial education. Words can make you rich. At the age of 9, I knew I was going to be a rich man, simply because Rich Dad taught me the meaning of financial words. I knew I was going to be rich because I knew the difference between assets and liabilities. At the age of 9, I knew my job was to acquire assets and minimize liabilities. This was not rocket science. I was only 9 years and I was only 9 years old and I could understand those concepts. The difference between most Americans of any age and me is that someone, in this case, my rich dad, took the time to teach me the words, the language of money, so I could feel knowledgeable and strong and in control of my money and by extension, my life. Maybe this is where your second chance starts. Rich Dad began our financial education, learning the definition of words by playing Monopoly. At the age of 9, I knew that one greenhouse was an asset. Asset. When it produced, let's say, $10 of cash flow, money flowing into my pocket. Two greenhouses put $20 in my pocket. The math was not hard. Knowing the definition of financial words was powerful and life changing. As I grew older and more experienced, my wealth increased as my financial vocabulary increased. As I stated earlier, knowledge is power. Knowledge begins with words, And the best news of all, words are free. As Fuller said, words are tools, the most powerful tools created by humans. Words are fuel for our brains. Using poor words is like putting low quality gasoline in a car. It affects long term performance and can impact a person's entire life. Another way of putting this is poor people are not poor, they are using poor words to power their powerful minds, powerful brains. Money alone can never end poverty. Many people give poor people money out of kindness. Oftentimes, giving money to poor people only keeps them poor longer. If we want to see an end to poverty, we should begin by upgrading the words poor people use. Entitlement mentality. An early lesson from my Sunday school class is give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for life. Teaching people to become self reliant begins with words of empowerment rather than words of entitlement. Many in the middle class struggle because they too use power words, use poor words, sorry. Many in the middle class use the words save money, which is ridiculous. When banks and governments are printing money on presses that are running at high speed, millions of middle class people and amateur investors invest for long term. That too makes no sense when professional investors using HFT, high frequency trading, are investing for milliseconds. For HFT traders, long term is half a second. Financial confusion. Millions of people struggle financially because they use words they do not understand. Many times, so called financial experts use financial terms as or jargons to sound intelligent and to confuse their clients. For example, I once attended a financial seminar and the financial expert was using words like stochastic, moving averages, and dark pools. As the saying goes, if you can't dazzle them with your brilliance, baffle them with your BS. The reason so many people lose money when investing is because someone baffled them with financial BS. One word that amused Rich Dad was the word broker. He often chuckled when someone used that word, saying, the reason a person is called a stockbroker is or a real estate broker is because they are often broker than you are. Rich Dad thought it was a high risk to take investment advice from someone who did not eat unless they sold you something. He also said, most people get financial advice from salespeople, not rich people. That is why most investors lose money. Rich Dad had nothing against salespeople. Instead, he said, it is up to the investor to know the difference between good financial advice and a sales pitch. As Warren Buffett says, Wall Street is the only place that people ride in a Rolls Royce to get advice from those who take the subway. The power of words. Rich Dad would not allow his son and me to use words like I can't and I can't afford it. Rich Dad would say that the people who use those words the most are poor people. He would often say, people say I can't work for people who say I can, rather than say I can't afford it. Rich Dad instructed us to ask, how can I afford it? And in place of the word hope, he preferred the words I intend or I will. Like Dr. Fuller, Rich Dad was very careful about the words he used. Although he was not very religious, he often used lessons from Sunday school to make his point. When reminding us of our words choices and the power they have, Rich Dad would quote from the book of John, and the word became flesh. The cash heist. When Bucky used the word heist in the title of his book, I was a bit shocked. Heist is a very strong word, and I was sure Fuller thought long and hard before incorporating that word into the title of his book. I wondered if Bucky was angry when he chose that title, or simply knew his time on Spaceship Earth was limited. It's clear that wanted it's clear that wanted to make a strong statement. Finishing Grunge of Giants in 1983, I immediately looked up the word heist. The simple definition of the word heist are: number one, noun, a robbery. Number two, verb, steal. Again, I thought his use of the word heist was a bit strong, direct, and dangerous because he was using the word heist in connection with institutions we trust, hold sacred, institutions that are the core of our culture. Until he wrote Grunge of Giants, Fuller was generally known as the friendly genius. His use of the word heist was a departure from his reputation for benevolence, accusing our schools, banks, legal system, government, politicians, and military of a gross universal cash heist was a departure for the financial friendly genius. It was at that point I decided to do some of my own research. What I found deeply disturbed me. The heist of education. The first two questions I asked myself were: who controls education and who determines what is taught in our schools? What I learned troubled me. In 1903, John D. Rockefeller created the General Education Board. There was much controversy about why he created this organization. People say he created the General Education Board to improve education. Others say he created it to hijack the educational system of the United States. While heist and hijack are not the same words, they have similar meanings. Around the same time, another of the robber barons, Andrew Carnegie, promoted his foundation for the advancement of teaching. It seems both Rockefeller and Carnegie were working to influence the American education agenda, directing what students were taught in schools. The question is, what was their agenda? I'm reminded again that the general principle, unity is plural, and at a minimum two, applies. While some people will say Rockefeller and Carnegie were working for the good of our children, others say exactly the opposite. In my search, I came across reports written 60 to 100 years ago, inflammatory reports from credible people, reports that were hard to believe. what they accused Rockefeller and Carnegie of orchestrating, and the words they used are best not repeated. Today, looking back on those reports with decades of hindsight, there does seem to be some validity to the concerns. Those most critical of Rockefeller and Carnegie accused the two men of wanting to break the American spirit and using the education system to do it. Americans are individuals who left the countries of birth for freedom, from oppression, and for opportunity of a better life. A shot at the American dream. This made the DNA of Americans too strong, too independent, and too ambitious to be subservient to the rich and powerful. Those critical of Carnegie and Rockefeller believe that before the rich and powerful, people like Rockefeller and Carnegie could gain further control over Americans and the wealth of America. The American spirit had to be weakened, and Americans made dependent upon the government for financial support. And is this why there is no financial education in our schools? It's certainly possible. Today, when you look at the charts I used in chapter 1, there does not seem to be some validity to the concerns of credible people decades ago. There does seem to be some validity to the concerns of credible people decades ago. Dependent upon the government. It's tough to argue with statistics, and it appears that Americans are becoming more dependent upon the government, and that the entitlement mentality is replacing the American dream, as we've seen before. Decline of the middle class. Now look again at the chart on the next page on the decline of the middle class in America, and then take another look at the chart of the Social Security Fund. Dependent upon Social Security. Today in America, there are approximately 70 to 80 million baby boomers getting ready to retire. Approximately 65 million Americans, 35 million households, have little to nothing set aside for retirement. That means more than 60 million people may soon go dependent or may soon be dependent upon the US government to take care of them. Are you saying that 60 to 100 years ago, the people who accused the rich grunge people of using the education system to weaken the American spirit were ostracized, made to sound like quacks and heretics? Yes, education is supposed to be pure, hallowed for higher purposes only. To accuse robber barons such as Carnegie and Rockefeller of intentionally weakening the spirits of these American people via education was considered heresy. Rockefeller's General Education Board proclaimed that they were taking young people out of the agrarian age and training them for industrial age. And they did do that. Yet, if you look at what's going on in America and the world today, it's not hard to see that Americans are becoming more dependent upon the government for life support. America today is less a democracy and more an oligarchy, a country with a few extremely rich, powerful people and a growing gap between the rich and everyone else. In many ways, America is becoming more like modern day Russia, a land of oligarchs, than the democratic America our founders envisioned. regardless of whether you believe Rockefeller and Carnegie were working for good or evil. What I found through my research validated Fuller's concern about grunge. The ultra rich and powerful, the oligarchs, taking control of important institutions such as education, and why there is little, if any, financial education in schools. In 1935, President Franklin D. Roosevelt introduced Social Security during the height of the Great Depression. Today, Social Security, Medicare, food stamps, and now Obamacare are part of the DNA of the American culture. It seems that more and more Americans today cannot survive without these government programs. So, why would the ultra rich and powerful work to influence education and leave out financial education? I leave that to your imagination. Teacher of the Year. In 1983, it was almost sacrilegious to criticize education. In many ways, education was on the same level as religion. Yet, as I did my research, I came across teachers who were defecting like priests, walking away from their church. One such teacher was John Taylor Gatto, and he was no ordinary teacher. He was named New York City Teacher of the Year in 1989, 1990, and 1991, and New York State's Teacher of the Year in 1991. Also, in 1991, he wrote a public letter to the Wall Street Journal announcing that he planned to quit teaching, saying that he no longer wished to hurt kids to make a living. He is the author of five books, including Dominos Down and Underground History of American Education. The purpose of education. There are three economic classes in America: rich, middle class, poor. As stated previously, there was a time when it was illegal to teach a slave to write. Without education, a slave would always be poor. My research convinced me that the purpose of modern education was to take poor people and educate them in ways that will create a large class of educated workers, executives, professionals, and soldiers. More specifically, employees, consumers, and taxpayers. The purpose of modern education was never to take the middle class and make them rich. That, in my opinion, is why there is no financial education in our schools. This is why this chart tells an interesting story. Figure 2U, cumulative change in real annual household capital income by income group 1979 to 2007. This chart explains why the millionaire next door described in the book that as a person of the middle class who became a millionaire via inflation of their home and retirement account may not be a millionaire in the near future. And one of the ways grunge steals our wealth begins in our schools via the lack of financial education. Why savers are losers. Like education, saving money is held as sacred. Going to the bank to save money is a bit like going to the church and leaving behind an offering to the financial gods of grunge. Without financial education, how would the average person know what the bank or know that the banks steal their wealth via their savings? They wouldn't. A saver's wealth is heisted via a banking mechanism known as the fractional reserve system. The concept of fractional reserve banking is thousands of years old. Why it isn't taught in school is no mystery to me. It's the way banks make money, and it's not pretty. Thousands of years ago, when a merchant wanted to travel across the country, rather than carry gold or silver, the merchant would deposit their gold and silver with a banker for safekeeping. The banker would then issue a claim for that gold on a piece of paper. The merchant would travel from his home to a faraway city, buy goods, and pay for them with a piece of paper called a claim. The seller of the goods would then go to his bank and could claim the payment in gold, or could simply use that piece of paper, the claim, and buy something else. The bankers soon realized that people liked paper, the claim, because it was more convenient to carry than gold or silver, easier to use in day to day transactions. It was not long before bankers were printing claims and lending claims to borrowers who wanted money. Things worked well as long as the owners of the gold and silver did not want their gold and silver back. If and when the owners of the gold and silver realized their banker was lending out more claims to their gold and silver, a run on the bank occurred. A run on the bank occurs when the true owners of the gold and silver no longer trust their banker and turn in their claims for the return of their gold and silver. If the banker has more claims than the gold or silver, the bank collapses and savers are losers. This is why the fractional reserve system was created. Simply stated, a bank can only lend out a specific fraction of the money that's in its vault. There are specific limits to the amounts they can lend to keep things simple. Let's use a fractional reserve of 10. This means if you deposit $10 into your savings account, the bank can lend out $100 or 10 times your $10 to people who want to borrow money. A diagram of this fractional reserve system makes things a bit easier to understand. The diagram on the previous page illustrates two things. Your $10 in your saving is your asset. Your $10 in savings is the bank's liability. Once again, you note unity is plural and at minimum two. In this case, for there to be an asset, there must be a liability. Why is my $10 and why is my $10 my asset but the bank's liability? By definition, assets put money in your pocket and liabilities take money from your pocket. In this example, when you save $10, the bank must pay you interest. So the interest flows from the bank's pocket to your pocket. The diagram below explains the process. The bank's assets. If the fractional reserve is 10, the bank can lend your $10 10 times, and the $100 in loans made by the bank is an asset for the bank. So the bank's assets are the loans it makes. Yes. How the bank makes money. Let's be generous and say the bank pays you 5% interest on your savings. When the bank lends the money that you will when the bank lends that money that they will charge between 10 and 50% for letting qualified borrowers as well as high risk ones use your money. That means the bank pays you your $10 at 5% interest, which equals 50 cents for 1 year. Let's say the bank charges 10% interest on $100. Your $10 times 10, it loans. Okay, $100 times 10% equals $10. So the bank pays me 50 cents and they are paid $10 on my $10? Yes, this is an overly simplified example, but this is how the fractional reserve system works. How does it steal my wealth? The fractional reserve system devalues the value of your savings. Your $10 now purchases less because your $10 is now $100 in the economy. It's known as inflation. Is inflation bad? Inflation is good for debtors and bad for savers, which is why savers are losers. Inflation is why life is harder for millions of people today. Why is life harder? Because life becomes more expensive. So that's how my wealth is stolen via the banking system. This is one simple example. There are many more. If you take the fractional reserve system to the next level, you will understand why savers really are the biggest losers. The next level? You mean what happens if the borrowers of the $100 deposit that the bank uh, deposits that $100 back into the bank? Exactly. And then the bank lets out $1,000. And what happens to my $10 in savings? It's worth less and less. It's worth less and less? You got it. The entire modern monetary system is based upon inflation. The banks and government want inflation. Why? For many reasons. One reason is so that debtors can pay back their debts with cheaper dollars. Another reason is because consumers spend money faster if they expect prices to go higher. Why is that? Think about it. If a person thinks cars will be 10% higher next year, he or she will buy a car this year. But if they expect the same car to be 10% less next year, you're likely to wait until next year. Doesn't inflation cause people to be gamblers? Yes. Many people will buy a house this year, hoping to flip it next year. The same is true with stocks and precious metals. Rather than have a stable, growing, and productive economy, we have an economy of speculators and gamblers. People who flip houses or trade stocks add little value to the economy. While they make some money, flippers actually make life harder and more expensive for other people. A person who buys a house for $100,000 and flips it for $120,000, doing little or nothing to improve the property, has added little to the economy, except to make life more expensive. The same is true for a person who buys a stock for $10 and sells for 15 2 days later. They have done little for the economy. Are you saying that this are you saying that is bad? No. All I'm saying is that's what happens when you have an economy that grows on inflation rather than production. Savers become losers and life becomes harder because life becomes more expensive. Inflation motivates many people to become consumers rather than investors. They eat, drink, and shop because tomorrow prices may be higher. When people wonder why the gap between the rich and everyone else is growing, some of the blame can be placed on our banks, the fractional reserve system, and of course, the lack of financial education in our schools. Schools that actually encourage students to save money. The heist via taxes. Many people believe paying taxes is being patriotic. Yet, if you study American history, you will learn that the American Revolution began in 1773 as a tax protest known as the Boston Tea Party. For years, America was pretty much a Uh, for years, America was pretty much tax free or low taxation nation. Why do some people think paying taxes is patriotic? In 1943, during World War II, the US government passed the Current Tax Payment Act. The government needed money to fight the war and needed tax revenue to pay for the war. Until 1943, the government had to wait for taxpayers to pay their taxes. To solve this problem, the Current Tax Payment Act was passed. What did the Current Tax Payment Act do? It allowed the government to get paid before workers got paid. Bucky Fuller said it allowed the rich to put hands directly into workers' pockets. Today, it's a giant. Today, it's a giant, ongoing cash heist that gets bigger and bigger as the government gets needier and the rich gets greedier. Remember, the entitlement mentality did not start with the poor. The entitlement mentality started at the top with grunge and the plan to heist our wealth via the banks, government, and taxes. In 1943, current tax payment acts gave rise to the military industrial complex that former General and outgoing President Dwight D. Eisenhower would later warn about in 1961. In 1943, with tax dollars now pouring into the government on a monthly basis, the military industrial complex could declare war forever. The Cold War began, and trillions in tax dollars went into producing weapons of mass destruction. Obviously, Grunge and friends of Grunge profits greatly from war and the fear of war. I've often thought that all Grunge has to do is use the media machine to whip up a potential threat from Iraq, North Korea, Russia, and the Taliban, Al Qaeda or ISIS, Islamic State, and US taxpayers feel they're paying taxes, that paying taxes is patriotic. Are you saying that the threats are not real? No. I know we have enemies. All I'm saying is that we will always be at war because war is profitable. For centuries, war is how nations have stolen the wealth of other nations. War is a giant cash heist on many levels, and on people through blood, sweat, and taxes on both sides of the war, real or perceived. Who pays taxes? Picture below my rich dad's cash flow quadrant. It is also the title of the book number 2 in the Rich Dad series. Rich Dad's cash flow quadrant. E stands for employee, S stands for self employed, small business, or specialists like doctors, lawyers, and consultants. B stands for big business, companies with 500 or more employees. I stands for professional investors. And while many people invest, they may not be professional investors. Professional investor is specific task category. Taxes and the quadrant. Taxes tell an interesting story. Tax percentage paid per quadrant. E 40%, B 20%, S 60%, and I 0%. ENS, those who go to school and get a job pay the highest taxes. BNI, those who operate according to the rules of Grunge pay the least taxes. Again, this is why lesson 1 in Rich Dad Poor Dad is the rich don't work for money. People who work for money, for paychecks, have their wealth heisted via taxes. When President Obama promised to raise taxes on the rich, he raised taxes primarily on high income earners in the E and S quadrants. Heists via bailouts. How many times have we heard this quote from former Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke? repeated. One myth that's out there is that we're doing uh one myth that's out there is what we are doing is printing money. We are not printing money. In 1994, G. Edward Griffin published his classic book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. It is a long yet easy to read history of the Federal Reserve Bank and includes the history of banks and the banking industry. If you love crime stories, you will love this book. The title, The Creature of Jekyll Island, comes from the story of how the concept of the US Federal Reserve Bank was created in secrecy in Jekyll Island, Georgia. It had to be formed in secrecy due to the opposition of the concept of a central bank in America. Many of the founders of America were vehemently opposed to the central bank, like the Bank of England, that would control the money supply in America. The founders feared the central bank would eventually have more power than the US government. As English banker named Amschel Rothschild stated, "Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes the rule." My take on the core theme of the creature of Jekyll Island is bailouts are the name of the game. In other words, bailouts are another method Grunge uses to heist our wealth. Make no mistake, bailouts are not accidents. Grunge designed bailouts into the system. In 2008, when the bailout of the biggest US banks began, many people thought bailouts were something new, an emergency procedure to save the economy. Nothing could further Nothing could be further from the truth. Bailouts allow banks to lend money to friends and family members of Grunge. If friends and family loot the money, they don't pick up the tab. The taxpayers do. Bailouts protect Grunge. The biggest banks, the biggest banks aren't held accountable and do not have to pay for their mistakes. If you and I make financial mistakes, we suffer the consequences even to the point of declaring bankruptcy, going to jail, or losing everything. The Bush bailout. During the 1980s, there were an SNL, savings and loan bailout. One of the more interesting was the bailout of Silverado Savings and Loan. Neil Bush, another son of former President George H.W. and Barbara Bush, was a member of the board of directors of Denver-based Silverado Savings and Loan, since his father was vice president of the United States at that time. Neil's role in Silverado's failure was a focal point of media attention. The U.S. Officer of Thrift Supervision investigated Silverado's failure and determined that Bush had engaged in numerous breaches of his fiduciary, duties involving multiple conflicts of interest. Breaches of his fiduciary duties involving multiple conflicts of interest means the bank violated its responsibilities to its customers, savers, and made loans to Bush's friends for businesses in which he had an interest. Although Bush was not indicted on criminal charges, a civil action was brought against him and other Silverado directors by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC. The parties reached an out of court settlement, with Bush paying $50,000 as part of the settlement. The point I want to make is this: the Denver Post reported that Silverado collapse cost taxpayers $1 billion. Once again, Grunge, the ultra rich and powerful, wins, and taxpayers lose. The Twinkies bailout. In 2012, Hostess brands, makers of Wonders Bread and Twinkies, an iconic cream filled sponge cake snack, went out of business. The retirement fund of the hostess truck drivers was only in trouble, was also in trouble. It could not make the retirement payments to the drivers. In 2013, President Obama approved the bailout of the drivers' pension plan. While many held this bailout as benevolent, decent, and necessary to protect the drivers, keep in mind that there are always three sides to every coin. The question is, who did Obama really bail out? The drivers or the Utenberg family, owners of the 140-year-old bakery business? When the company went down, it meant that Utenberg family would be the only contributors to the pension plan. If that happened, the Utenberg family would go burst. Are you saying President Obama bailed out the Utenberg family, not the drivers? No. I'm saying Bucky would say unity is plural and at minimum two. And Rich Dad would say a coin has three sides: heads, tails, and the edge. Intelligent people stay on the edge and look at both sides. Since grunge controlled the four M's: military, money, minds, and media, most of the people media reports popular media reports only on one side of the coin or the story. In this case, the bailout of drivers, rarely will you see news reports that delivers two or more sides. Bear in mind that the entitlement mentality starts at the top, not the bottom. This is why Grunge wants the public to believe these bailouts are good for everyday person. Joe the plumber, not the ultra rich. You could replace the Bush family bailouts with Ottenberg family bailouts, couldn't you? I believe you can replace Bush and Ottenberg, as well as Rockefeller and Carnegie, the Clintons, Obama and Romney with grunge. And as I've said repeatedly, this is why I believe there is no financial education in our schools. People who are uneducated financially do not ask tough questions. All they hear is what they want to believe, and most want to believe the government is there to protect them. In reality, the government exists to protect the rich. That is why the Federal Reserve Bank bailed out the banks, not the homeowners. That is why Fed Chairman Bernanke began printing trillions of dollars, as this chart from Chapter 1 shows. Was he lying when he said that? Not really. He just wasn't telling the full truth. Remember, all truths has at least two sides. It was true that the money in circulation was not changing. That's because the money he was printing was going to bail out the banks. The money he was printing was not going into circulation. In 2014, the big banks are flushed with cash, but they are not lending that money to small businesses or Joe the plumber. Again, Bernanke bailed out the big banks, but not the homeowners whose jobs, homes, wealth, and future were stolen by the big banks. This is one more reason why I believe Fuller used the word heist in the title of his last book. What is the difference between the bank bailout and the Twinkies bailout? The Twinkies bailout sets a new precedent. It expands the scope of bailouts. If you think the bank bailouts were big, just wait until the retirement fund bailouts begin. In the world of retirement funds, there are two basic types. Number one, DB, or Defined Benefit Plan. This means the retiree is guaranteed a paycheck for life. Number two, DC, or Defined Contribution Plan. Okay. Number two, DC or defined contribution plan. This means the retiree receives only what he or she and their company contributed while the worker was employed. These funds are often called 401ks, IRAs, and Roth IRAs. The difference between the DB plan and the DC plan is that the DC can run out of money if retirees live longer than the contributed money lasts, or if a market crash causes their retirement to crash with it. The Twinkle bailout was a bailout of a DB, a defined benefit plan. In theory, DB plans have professional management, while most DC plans are managed by the retiree. Bailing out Twinkies can be viewed as yet another example of Wall Street protecting its own. These professional money managers, many with advanced degrees from prestigious schools, should have been working for and protecting the workers, but in reality, they were working for Wall Street. No one really knows just how many of these professionally managed DB funds. President Obama reinforces the precedent of bailing out other DB funds in trouble. If the economy weakens or if the stock market crashes, the next bailout could be a multi trillion dollar bailout. While the workers with a DC pension plan be bailed out? Oh, will the workers with a DC pension plan be bailed out? It's possible, but I doubt it. Most of the people with DC plans don't work for Wall Street or come from ultra rich families. Aren't retirement plans protected by the government? No, not really. The PBGC, the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, is an insurance company. If pension funds go bust, the PBGC steps in. The problem is the PBGC cannot cover its obligations. In 2014, the PBGC's deficit was more than $35.6 billion and growing. The government may soon have to bail out the PBGC. The same bailout provision are found in the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare. The insurance companies involved in this program are protected by government bailout provisions. Remember, a bailout means the rich and powerful make money, but if the rich and powerful lose money, the taxpayers guarantees their bailouts. Heist via Nixon. President Richard Nixon did a lot to contribute to today's financial crisis. 1971, Nixon took the US dollar off the gold standard. This hurt the poor, the elderly, and everyone on fixed income. Taking the dollar off the gold standard also caused a massive boom in the global economy. Even the middle class millionaire next door got rich via paying tax or via raises, rising home values, and soaring retirement portfolios. 1972, Nixon traveled to China and opened the trade doors between the two nations. This was good for owners of factories who moved their production to China. It was bad for American workers who now had to compete with a low wage Chinese labor force. 1974. President Nixon resigned in disgrace on August 8 over his involvement in the Watergate scandal. A few days later, on September 2nd, 1974, ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, was signed into law by President Gerald Ford, who had just replaced Nixon. ERISA morphed into the popular 401k plans that many US employees now subscribe to. Again, look closely at the titles of many government acts, such as the Affordable Care Act. Oftentimes, they are exactly the opposite of what the title implies. Specifically, we're learning that the Affordable Care Act actually made health insurance more expensive for many workers. And with ERISA, the security of an employee's retirement income became less much secure. As stated in the earlier comparison between DB and DC pension plans, a DB plan in theory is short paycheck for life. A DC pension plan funds retirement only as long as there is money in the employee's DC plan. Millions of workers are now counting on the stock market to keep their hopes and dreams of a secure retirement alive. That's gambling, not investing. The chart from chapter 1 poses one simple, interesting question. The question I ask is, what will happen in the near future? Will the stock market keep going up? Will it go sideways or will it go down? If the stock market crashes, what will happen to the millions of baby boomers with the DC pension plan? Will the government bail them out like it bails out the rich and powerful, the members of Grunge? If the market crashes, could there be another Great Depression? I will let you answer that question for yourself. From my point of view, millions are already in a Great Depression. There are millions of people who are already relying on government support or are among the working poor or feel the stress of shrinking middle class, all hoping a good education will save them and their kids. The Dark Ages. As I've said, I wondered when the Dark Ages began. How are we held in a prison that has no steel bars, chains, or locks? One way is a lack of financial education. My research found we the people have been one for years. For example, in 1802, Thomas Jefferson said, I believe that the banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the bank and corporations that will grow up around the banks will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continents their father conquered. The dark ages are still upon us. In 2014, central banks all over the world are fighting. Oh, in 2014, central banks all over the world are fighting deflation by printing trillions of dollars. Deflation is harder to fight than inflation. The central banks are printing money to prevent the stock market and economy from crashing. This is why the crisis we are in today is the most dangerous in world's history. Boom, then bust. The middle class millionaires next door enjoy the boom caused by inflation. What are they going to do if the market deflates? What happens if their home prices, stock prices, and pay raises don't go up? What can they do? How to get out of the dark ages? The question is, who's next? What if this cash heist does start in our school system? So, what if the education is the problem? Then that's good news because then education can solve the problem for some people. Some people? Not all people? No, not all people. Why not? Because not all people are willing to learn. Most are hoping that everything will stay the same and that tomorrow will be the same as yesterday and that they'll get through another day, another week, and year. Will tomorrow be the same as yesterday? I'll let you answer that question for yourself. In conclusion, using Fuller's process of pro- prognostication, looking at the past to see the future, it seems class warfare. In 1971, the poor and working class had their wealth stolen when the US dollar went off the gold standard. In 2007, the middle class had its wealth stolen when millions lost their jobs, their homes, and their retirement savings. Who is next? Are the rich next? Or, as Jefferson warned, will our children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered? Well, we'll look at answers to that question in the next chapter. Ciao, ciao.